Well, hi everyone. My name is Darren Wilson, editor of the Boom Bust Bulletin editions, and I'm joined by Akhil Patel, co-director of Property Sharemarket Economics. We've just run our 8th Boom Bust Bulletin webinar, and as usual, we received a whole heap of questions concerning the stock, the land markets, and the economy in general. We couldn't answer all of them on the night, so Akhil and I have decided to join up tonight to run through most of those questions so that you guys can get those answered. Akhil, are you ready to go?
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so we'll start with Geordie, who asks about Donald Trump. Will Trump push the cycle further than 18 years or simply higher and harder to a massive land-driven downturn?
Higher and harder, a massive downturn. So, yeah, he's a property man. Property men like low interest rates and lots of borrowing and a lot of speculation and excessive behavior and so on. And he will push policies that are consistent with that because that's what he knows. I think it will make the property boom bigger. I don't think it will delay the cycle at all or elongate it. But, sometimes when there's particular euphoria and excessive behavior of some parts of the economy, like the stock market, might go on a bit longer than others. But I think it'll make it bigger. And then if it gets bigger, it will be worse in the downturn.
Quite an ironic question, considering we almost didn't have Donald Trump a few days ago.
Yeah.
The next question is from Jordan. It's about construction costs, so things like material and labour. Will they decrease as we come towards the end of the current real estate cycle? He says that his friend got quoted $1 million Australian to build a house in Adelaide, and that was just to build the house, not the land.
Well, hopefully it's a very big house because that's very expensive build cost. I don't think they'll decrease, but they may not go up by at the same rate that they have been in the last couple of years because of labour shortages, because of material costs and so on. I mean, I think we are in a boom phase of commodities, or we will be soon. And so material costs probably won't come down. They may even go up, but of course it's the labour which I think really racks up the cost. And I don't see that going up to the same extent. Could be wrong because, there is a shortage of labour at the moment, and people are doing other things, and there's a lot of demand for new builds. But I don't think build costs will come down, but may not go up quite as much.
Right, thanks for that. Chris had a question about timing of the winner's curse. He seems to think that a few years ago we said the winner's curse would end in 2024 rather than 25-26. I don't recall us ever saying that. But
We've been very consistent for the last 10 or 15 years that it would be the 2 years into a peak around 2026. So the winner's curse would be around 2024, which is kind of what we're still saying. We've not really changed our sort of forecast or timing at all in all that time, despite all that's happened.
So to be absolutely clear, so nothing you've seen or read at the moment tells you that anything other than that's the time period there.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. All right, well, thanks for that. Question now from Corey, asking about should he sell before the crash or remortgage their, I assume, property portfolio and fix the interest rate terms? Will that be early 2026 for the crash or later on in the year? Very common question.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, what can I say about this? So look, if you're a property portfolio holder, I don't think you should try and finesse it too much. If you've got, good profits and stuff and you want to be in cash, then don't wait till, the absolute last moment, because it sometimes takes quite some time to sell and all that sort of thing. And, leave a bit on the table for the poor sod that's going to buy it off you. So I don't know if it's the start of 2026, the end of 2026. I mean, Australia, I don't know where he's located, but Australia is a few months behind the US. The US the US housing or land market might start to turn potentially late 2025. You might not see it really in real estate prices until sometime in 26. And then you might not see it in the UK and Australia until later that year. Or maybe, things don't stop going up for a few months or 18 months or something. So they're not going down, but it sort of just stayed high and it doesn't keep going up. That would be a warning sign that, you might have a chance to get out. It sort of depends on where your portfolio is, what your investment intentions are and so on. I'd say don't try to be too smart about it. Just if it's a sensible decision, you get good value, you can find ready buyers, you've got financing, then any time between now and the end of next year would be a good window to do it.
Excellent. I think we had someone, Martin, who was from Ireland on the webinar actually, which is fantastic. He asked a question specifically to yourself. How will the downturn play out in Ireland relating to property prices with such a shortage of houses for accommodation at the moment?
Yeah, this Ireland is a very interesting property market because it sort of seems to boom every time, and it's happening again. And a lot of what people were saying in the 2000s about how there's such a shortage of property seemed not to be the case during the downturn, where they had like 3 years worth of supply being built at the same time. So I would be a little skeptical about all the stories about how much of a shortage there is. That story clearly is fueling a lot of the building and so on. I don't think that it's going to play out any differently. There will be the supposed shortage now. It justifies building houses at high prices. There'll be too much supply in the crash, and it will come crashing down fairly hard, and it won't change the timing, in my view.
Yeah, that's a great response. In fact, from an Australian point of view, Prosper Australia actually came out with their vacancy report in Melbourne. It's now estimated 100,000 properties based on water usage are now sitting idle and empty. So it's a worldwide phenomenon at this time of the cycle.
Absolutely.
Mavez is the next question here. This is Australian property market focused. He notices, and quite correctly, that Australian property market did not fall a great deal back in 2008, the so-called GFC. When you compare it to the United States and the UK, what do our models say for the next crash post-2026? I assume this is Australian focused. Is there a scenario where Australian property won't crash and will keep pumping along?
Yeah, Australia as a whole didn't crash. I think if you were an investor on the outskirts of Darwin or some small city where there'd been a bit of a, building boom, a building boom, I think, and then you were trying to offload those properties in 2008, I think you would have experienced quite a significant kind of crash, as it were. You'd be not getting the price that you would have been able to get in 2006 and 2007. So, and I should have said this in relation to the other question. Property is a locational asset and depends on what market you're talking about. But yes, it's true that Australia as a whole didn't go down too much. And that was partly for two reasons. One is that, Australia was doing very well economically from the commodities boom. The government had a lot of cash. It handed it out to a lot of people. And, they could sort of benefit from low interest rates and the continuation of the commodities boom, because China and the US stimulated their economies quite quickly in late 2008, early 2009. And that sort of allowed commodity prices to keep going up because a lot of it was based around infrastructure, and that benefited Australia. So to answer the question about what will happen in 2026, it depends if the same conditions apply. We are seeing, and we talk about the commodity cycle, the Kondratiev wave, that should peak around the same time and then come down sort of fairly hard. And if that's the case in the late part of the decade, then Australia will suffer from that, and it could have a sort of fairly significant property crash. So bottom line is, be careful where you're invested in, what else is being built in that area, being sure that, there is really demand for the kind of properties that you own. It will be less severe in, better the location. So in good locations within Melbourne and Sydney and, Brisbane, if people are still moving there and so should be fairly insulated, but it doesn't mean that they won't experience some kind of downturn for a couple of years or more.
Shameless plug for your book time. You wrote at least a chapter, if not more, about Nikolai Kondratiev and the importance of his work. And that's something,
very key sort of figure in the sort of among people who study cycles.
Very much so. And of course, if people take up the offer from the webinar, they'll get that book for free with it too. So great stuff. Fiona is next here, asking about the severity of the property crash. It's not location dependent, so I just assume it's a general one. But does the severity of the property crash depend on how high prices get at the peak of the cycle?
In general. How much borrowing has gone on, how high it's been, how much sort of excessive speculation there's been. So the bigger the boom, the bigger the bust is kind of the rule. And particularly the bigger the boom based on credit and borrowing and stuff.
Sarah asks a very interesting question. It's focused on agricultural land, something that most people just don't tend to follow. But does agricultural land follow the same 80-year cycle, and does it experience similar rises and falls in value?
So I think you're talking about agricultural land for growing stuff, as opposed to agricultural land on the edge of cities for sort of zoning and building houses. No, it sort of follows probably the Kondratiev cycle a bit more. So sort of the 54 to 60 year cycle. And there are other commodity cycles within that 30 years and so on. I think agricultural land probably follows that as much as anything else. That being said, when there is sort of excessive speculation going on in sort of urban, residential and commercial markets, agricultural land at the edge of cities becomes zoned for development and so on. And that's very much affected by the 18-year cycle.
Absolutely. And that is happening, particularly in the US right now too. Yeah. Last question here. This is from Nathan. Bit of a bleak subject, actually. If war breaks out broadly, does this shift a property cycle? And he's talking about not a local war, but a world war. What does history say about that?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a world war and we're spending all our time, building munitions and, firing bullets and other things, lasers at each other, clearly much of that economic activity will be halted. And that includes the cycle. And that's what history shows us from the 20th century. So the cycle in Europe was interrupted by the First World War, and to some extent in America, but less so. And all the sort of cycles were interrupted by the Second World War. But to be honest, if we're fighting that kind of total war, I'm not really sure we'll care about whether the cycle's on track or not. Because it will be, potentially sort of more of an existential threat. Hopefully that doesn't come to pass. And I should have said in relation to the Kondratiev wave, towards the end of that wave, you always have the great powers in conflict. You have certainly seen that over the last few years, kind of proxy wars between the US and Russia and Ukraine, you could argue. There's the sort of trade wars between the US and China, but there's sort of maneuvering in all sorts of parts of the world, in the Pacific, in the Arctic, and other places across the Eurasian landmass. Whether that breaks out into open conflict or it becomes more cyber related or and so on, I don't know, but it's likely to be highly disruptive. Hopefully just not kind of as bad as we got in the 20th century. I'm not sure it will be, personally, but you never know. We do have enough mad politicians and leaders who do things that can lead us down that path, which is sort of obviously a very dark path.
Yeah, I think Kondratiev himself called this part of the K-wave the wars of expansion, and he detailed what democracies generally do, and that's unfortunately what we've been seeing. So, hope springs eternal, I guess, on that. But look, that's all the questions we've got. There were quite a few more, but they were all covered by this select group that we did there. So we pretty much covered them off. So Akhil, thank you very much. We'll work hard to get this out to all the Boom Bust Bulletin members and attendees. so we've covered off all the questions. And until next time, thanks for your time, Akhil, and we'll see you later.
Great. Thank you.